This week in British history, early February 1014, the death of Sweyn Forkbeard. So this week in British history, we're heading back to more than 1,000 years ago and to a moment where England is, well, it's hanging in the balance. One of those moments where, depending on what happens next, the country could have gone in a completely different direction. By the early 11th century, England had been under pressure for a long time. Viking raids had been happening for decades. Some came, took what they wanted, and then left again. Others came, settled, and then never really went home. And eventually, one Viking leader managed to do what many before him hadn't. Sweyn Forkbeard, King of Denmark, invaded England and forced the Anglo-Saxon king, Ethelred the Unready, into exile. By the end of 1013, Sweyn was accepted as King of England, a Viking king on an English throne, and you think that's it, job done. But in early February 1014, and this is where it all changes, Sweyn Forkbeard dies. No big battle, no dramatic ending, just suddenly gone. And amazingly, with his death, everything shifts. The power vacuum. Sweyn's army immediately backs his son, Knut the Great, and declares him king, which makes sense, but the English nobles don't see it that way, and you've guessed it, they do something unexpected. They invite Ethelred back from exile. On one condition, though, that he rules better than he had before. So for a brief moment, England returns to an Anglo-Saxon rule, not because it's strong, but because it's kind of convenient for them. And that moment, that pause, doesn't last long. Why does this matter? This short window in 1014 tells us a lot. It shows us just how fragile kingship was at the time. You didn't rule because you wore a crown, you ruled because people allowed you to. It also shows how connected England already was to Scandinavia, politically, culturally, and economically. And within a few years, and you've probably guessed where this is going, it comes back, takes England properly, and becomes one of the most successful kings. But right here in early 1014, England hesitates. And this is the bit I always love, the detectorist connection, because this period is literally written into the ground for us. Anglo-Scandinavian pennies, stycas, hand silver, strap-ends, mounts, all of it belongs to this messy overlap between the cultures. So when detectorists find a mix of Anglo-Saxon and Viking material in the same area, they're often standing on landscapes shaped by moments just like this one, moments where nobody quite knew what England was going to do next. So this week in British history, early February 1014, we're remembering the death of Sweyn Forkbeard, a Viking king whose sudden death briefly handed England back to its past before pushing it firmly towards a very different future. So as a Brucey bonus, we've got a second event in British history. This is for the 8th of February 1587, which was the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. And to one of the most dramatic and uncomfortable moments in royal history, the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. And you've probably heard the name 1,000 times, but the reality of what happens here is far more tense, far more political, and honestly, far more human than people expect. Because this wasn't just an execution, this was a queen ordering the death of another queen. So by the late 1500s, England is now under the rule of Elizabeth I. Protestant England, stable on the surface, but of course constantly under threat. At the centre of that thread sits Mary, Queen of Scots. She was Catholic, she was royal, and crucially with a legitimate claim to the English throne, which makes her incredibly dangerous. Mary had already been forced to abdicate the Scottish throne and had fled to England years earlier, expecting protection from Elizabeth. Instead, she was placed under house arrest, and she stayed there for nearly 2 decades. Now imagine this situation. You're Elizabeth, you're ruling England, and sitting in your country is another queen, one that Catholics across Europe believe should be on the throne, your throne instead. Lots of plots start forming, letters are intercepted, and eventually, big one, the Babington plot, planned to assassinate Elizabeth and replace her with Mary. And this is the turning point. because once Mary is linked to that plot, everything changes. And you've guessed it, Elizabeth can't ignore it anymore. Mary is tried for treason, and on the 8th of February 1587, Fotheringhay Castle, she is executed. And amazingly, even in that moment, she behaves exactly as you'd expect a queen to, composed, dignified, and calm, as the records show. She dressed carefully, she speaks with control, and she accepted what was about to happen. The execution itself is not good. It's not the clean, single stroke you might imagine. Unfortunately for Mary, it takes more than one blow, which only adds to the sense that this moment is bigger than the room it happened in, because the shockwaves spread across Europe almost immediately. So why did this matter so much? This wasn't just about Mary. It was about religion, power, succession, control. Elizabeth had resisted signing Mary's death warrant for a long time, and even afterwards tried to distance herself from the decision, because killing another monarch set a dangerous precedent. It told Europe that the kings and queens were no longer untouchable, and it hardened the divide between Protestant England and Catholic Europe. So, where is the detectorist connection, where we reach back, and I always say we're time travellers? Well, it connects back to the ground, as it always does. This period is rich in Tudor material culture. Coins of Elizabeth I turn up far more than Mary's for obvious reasons. My first two hammers were Elizabeth I. Mary's time rule in Scotland was shorter, her English presence controlled, and her legacy complicated. So when Tudor artefacts surface, they're often tied to this exact era of tension: propaganda, identity, loyalty. The objects in the soil reflect a country choosing sides. So this week in British history, the 8th of February 1587, we remember the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, a moment where politics, religion, and royal power collided, and where one queen signed the death warrant of another. And even now, centuries later, it still feels uncomfortable. It was personal, it was political, and it was brutal. If you've enjoyed this midweek episode, please make sure you hit the follow button, submit a review. We've also got our YouTube channel now. Go and find Detecting History. Give us a like and subscribe over there. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and of course the YouTubes. We have got a 10% promo code off most items at Regton. Use the code DH Podcast. Thanks very much for your support, everyone. Speak soon.